Amen. May the words that are heard be thine and not mine. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Smelting. Smelting, as defined by the businessdictionary.com, is a metal extraction process in which ore, usually mixed with purifying and or heat-generating substances, such as limestone and coke, well, it's heated at high temperatures in an enclosed furnace. After a reduction reaction, lighter ore components, impurities called slag or tailing, they rise to the top and they float on the molten metal to be removed. It's really cool. It's actually really hot. The purpose of purifying metals is to ensure their rigidity and integrity so that when used in construction projects, let's say, there is stability, safety, and longevity. Iron, for perspective, melts at 2,800.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's really hot. This process is the derivative of pop culture phrases like fire tested or proven by fire. Evidently, the heat must be extreme to remove all the contaminants and pollutants. Today we continue our path through the ordinary days after Pentecost, and our focus remains the plight of everyday Christian living. Our topic, fittingly, on this eve of Labor Day is works-based faith, or the age-old debate of works versus faith. It is the Peter versus Paul debate. I wonder what Mary thought. Peter, Paul, Mary. Not my best. Our epistle reading, oh me. Our epistle reading is from James, and he would most probably have been in the Peter camp. He was the equivalent of the first pastor of the church in Jerusalem and the stepbrother of Jesus. Probably a little clout there, I'm just saying. The position of the said camp would be that works, your labor in the kingdom, were essential, not just to the functionality of the organization, but even more so as an indication somehow of your faith. Your toil was evidence or proof of your salvation, if not some ways salvific in themselves. The influence for the stance is obviously Torah, the Jewish law, and the legalism that was so integral to Judaism. Furthermore, the first Christian church was predominantly comprised of Jews. So you can see the correlation. Remember, the law was their way to salvation. It was the rule book. Follow it and you would have life. Ignore it and not so much. Moralism was ingrained into the Jews, so actions-based or works-based faith, works-based religion seemed natural. The tension arose when Paul suggested another way. Note, Paul, as a good Jew here, never says that Torah was invalid, just that a different path had opened up, especially for the non-Jews. The new way was less regulatory and more spiritual, and the "we've never done it that way before" circuit was up in arms. The works-oriented posture has worked its way into Christian mainstream thinking as well. The almost 1,000-page book of Roman Catholic Catechism that you can find in my office library is evidence of that influence. And growing up evangelical Baptist, we would have never said that works saved anyone. It was a product of faith and grace, sola fide, sola gratia. Yet the inference of the moralism-heavy based Christian education and instruction concerning ethics especially was that while works were not the source of salvation, they were an indication of an individual being converted. My grandmother would have said, "You can't squeeze an orange and get lemonade." Works did matter, especially morality and, of course, evangelizing others. It is interesting that the works Jesus emphasized, and we hear emphasized by James, those works that were most emphasized concerning the underprivileged, well, they're not emphasized a lot of times in evangelical circles. Advocative efforts for those that Jesus defined as the least among us were not stressed, unless we were trying to save them, of course. Interesting. Christ's teachings are very seldom a list of do's and don'ts. When he did offer instruction, it was often counterintuitive to standard practice. So he employed allegory to convey the lessons, parables. In today's gospel lesson, he rebukes the religious leaders of the day as being empty or void of substance, following rules for the sake of rule following. He said that their obedience was with their lips and not with their heart. It reminds me of the general thanksgiving in the daily office, not only with our lips, but in our lives. So what was it? Works or not? Well, nonetheless, the Gospels do cite elsewhere 6 different occasions Jesus admonishing those with ears should hear. The allusion could be interpreted as a call to action, to works. Now, you would think that James, being Christ's stepbrother, would have been familiar with Jesus' teachings. So his comment that we should be doers and not hearers of the word being a reference to Jesus, in the beginning was the Word. You would think that those are associative. James relates that action is intended. We are not called to be spiritual bench warmers. We're supposed to get into the game. I can just hear the Pauline corpus retorting, but not with lippy, heartless submission to mandates. Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." What were Jesus' commandments? Jesus said that all the commandments could be summarized as loving God and our neighbors. At the Last Supper, he gave a new commandment, that we love one another. The focus then is lordship and inclusion. God is the Lord of our entire lives, our actions, our thoughts, our deeds, our business practices, our tax returns, our relationships, our entertainment choices. And inclusion into community means everyone, irrespective of ethnicity, socioeconomics, race, religion, sexuality. We are all included. Sounds like to me that there is a practical application. Actions aren't necessarily salvific then, but they are responsive. What if our behavior isn't a requirement, but a response? What if our behavior isn't a requirement, but a response. Doesn't that seem more authentic? As we are transformed, we become more like Christ. Our desires, motivations, and objectives are molded into the same as Christ's. It is a product of our pursuit. We become in our thinking. Soon it is our aspiration. Kingdom work becomes our priority. The point was never that God would have some controlling measure of your life by forcing you to do work, or that God was looking for a free labor force. Kingdom work is your opportunity to apply your specifically designed gifts to intentionally assigned roles, so you might experience the fullness and the joy you desire. The fullness and the joy that you desire. You cannot achieve it otherwise. It is the completeness, the wholeness, the peace that you long for when your head hits the pillow at night. Where do I fit in? What is my role? It occurs as Christ happens to you individually and corporately in community, unsurpassed by any other quest. Psalm 127 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the labor is in vain." Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, says the following about the work. Their work is to be Christ's work, he says, and therefore they are absolutely dependent on the will of God. It is not their own work that they are doing, but it is God's work they are doing. Bonhoeffer was a giant of our faith. Very evangelical, as one might understand in his context. He alludes that the work is a great privilege, but also a difficult undertaking. Yet in it and through it, we are changed. Our labor is neither salvific then nor legalistic. Neither is it about authority or about judgment. Labor then in the kingdom is our purification by fire. And in that work we are cured. So, good Labor Day to all of you. Amen.